Hey, welcome to KPASA. This is a podcast of the Great Plains Baptist Association, and I'm here today with our good friend Steve Havener. Steve is the pastor at the First Baptist Church in Leedey, Oklahoma. And Steve, we've already talked about how you came to Christ as your Savior today. Hey, let's talk about how you were called to ministry.
Okay. Well, I remember in 1968, Johnny Bisagno, the great pastor of First Baptist Houston, was preaching at Falls Creek. And he made a plea on Saturday mornings when we still had services on Saturday morning.
Oh, man, I remember that.
Yeah, and Saturday morning, the church had to wait on me to go back home from Falls Creek. In fact, I went and felt like God was calling me to preach. And so I went under that old tree, and the big old tree there by the tabernacle, old tabernacle. Mm-hmm. And there I, just asked the Lord to guide me and surrendered to His call.
How old were you?
I was 12 years old.
12 years old.
And I went home and talked to my pastor, and we were visiting. He said, "Well, son, you better start buckling down to school." Well, you tell a 12-year-old kid, fifth grader, that doesn't want to do that. I kind of buckled to that and ran from God. I thought God was wrong, and so I began to run, and I ran just as hard as I could. I did the stupid things and, just against the Lord, just to prove to God He was wrong. And I ran for 13 years. And during that time, I met my wife. We didn't like each other in high school. We fell in love. Once she found out I was really a good catch, she decided to call me to be her husband. So anyway, we got married. But when I was 25, and I was praying, I was helping in the church what I could, doing things and that God wanted me to do. I was working with the youth a little bit, kept running from God, knew God was calling me, and I kept running from God. And had a buddy of mine that, we hadn't talked a whole lot about my call because I was running from God. And he came to my house one day, and he said, "Steve," it was on Sunday afternoon. He said, I was getting ready to take my nap, getting ready to go to sleep. And he said, "God told me to get up and come talk to you."
Wow.
And he said, "I don't know why. I don't know what this is." But he said, "Just take it as what I'd got." Mm-hmm. And he told me, he said, "God told me to tell you, you best be getting busy, because if you don't, there's consequences."
Man.
And so Sherry and I began to pray, and it wasn't too long after that one night I was praying, and it was just like you and I'm talking right now. Mm-hmm. It was just as clear as a bell. And God, and I was asked, "God, what do you want me to do? Can I, work with youth? What do you want me to do?" And He said, I called you to preach, and you best be preaching." And I woke Sherry up. Sherry was asleep. She's laying right next to me. I said, "Did you hear that?" And she goes, "What?" And I said, "God just told me verbally that I better get busy." And so I said, "We're going to have to do something." And so my call was simply, is over the course of 13 years that God patiently worked with me in that long suffering. And
what were you doing during that time? What did you do for a living?
Oh gosh, I did all kinds I worked on the railroad. Started out when we first got married. I worked on the railroad and run from the Lord. Worked with my dad and my brother on the railroad. Then when the railroad went out, the railroad closed down. Then I went to the oil field, and I worked in the oil field until 1982, and had a big bust during then. And so I got laid off from the oil field, and man, I really struggled for about a year. I had a buddy of mine who's a pastor now, but he owned a dairy boy at Geary, Oklahoma. And I said, "Man, I would love to work for you if you would let me." He goes, "No." And I said, "Why?" And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because every job you've had is closed down." And so he said, "I don't want to do that." And so anyway, but but it made me learn. I worked in a lumber yard and ended up working at the YMCA, and my YMCA director really said, he gave me the vision that I could go back to school, and knew I had to go back to school. And I told Sherry one morning we got up, and I said, I got good news and bad news. And she said, okay. She said, give me the good news first. And I said, well, God's called me to preach. And she said, I know it. And she said, God told me a long time ago. When she didn't know this, but in 7th grade, she surrendered to be a pastor's wife.
Wow.
She wanted to be a pastor's wife.
Isn't that great how God works?
Yeah. And she said, I married you instead. And so anyway, she said, but I knew that God was calling you to be a pastor. And so I said, well, she said, now the bad news. I said, well, I got to quit my job and go to OBU and get my degree. And so she said, I know. And so she was my confirmation. She's always been my fleece whenever we've made a move or did a major move. She's always been my fleece. And so my boss helped me to get grants and get help. It didn't cost me, but just I got a degree in a short amount of time. I went to OBU. Dr. Agee was the president, and I got my degree in 3 years without any loans. And he, Dr. Agee, helped me get in, and he said, I will give you a 1-year pass. And you come and let's see what God does. I went there with a 0.6 grade average.
Man, you were hitting the books hard.
I was hitting the books hard. I was really good at foosball and pool. But anyway, I went to OBU, and there I met 4 guys that we became fast friends. We were all married, had kids, and so we challenged each other. And we went through OBU. I ended up with a 2.75, which isn't that great, but in OBU, I had a 3.9 while my career at OBU. It's because we pushed each other to do those things. And we did OBU in 3 years. And
plus had a job.
Plus I drove a school bus, worked in the school library, and also pastored a church.
Now, where were you pastoring?
I was pastoring at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. When I went there, me and my 4 kids, my wife, we made up 17 people in that church.
Wow.
And when we left 3 years after I got out of college, we moved to Mulhall, Oklahoma, and we were running 54 consistently in Sunday school. And so, it was just an amazing time that God moved, taught me so much about, people and about this thing we call ministry and how to give and take. And I carry with it, one thing I do carry with it is the baggage of not always being a preacher.
Right.
I didn't surrender when I was, I just didn't give it all up and go. I envy guys that were able to do that. I was too bullheaded. And so, anyway.
Hey, you heard it there first. Pastor Steve's bullheaded, so you can hold that against him. Hey, listen, you may be out there, and maybe you've been a believer for a long time, and God's calling you to ministry, and you're just thinking, I'm not pastor material. Man, I'm going to tell you something. Yeah. You obey God, and He will make you pastor material. I promise you that. And so maybe today, just through this little podcast, just hearing this testimony, Pastor Steve, thank you for being obedient. Amen. Thank you for sharing that.